Hey, what's up, everybody? We have a new YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe right now. Leave a comment on the video. Share it with your friends. It's also a podcast, 3 and Out, wherever you listen with me, John Middlekauff, Apple, Spotify. We have you covered, as well as thevolume.com. We have merch. Check out. I got 3 and Out hats right now. Thevolume.com. Search the podcast. Buy some merch. What is happening? Beautiful midweek. We are about, if you're watching this on Thursday, about a week away from the draft. And I wanted to dive into that. Why the draft is so popular. It's always been a big deal. I would expect this draft to have enormous television ratings and to be one of the biggest drafts consumed by fans of all time. And I've been thinking a lot about this, and I kind of wanted to dive into that. Belichick today was on with Pat McAfee for like 30 minutes. I just watched it on YouTube, and it was fantastic. And he kind of illustrated something that I've been saying for a while that he should do moving forward. He's going to be on with Pat, I think, on the pregame show next week for the draft. But, man, his personality is a lot different than the guy we got used to on the press conferences when he was a head coach. Joe Alt, who many consider the best left tackle in this draft, not going to lie, I got a little buyer beware, and we'll dive into that, as well as gambling. The NBA banned a player for life, Jontay Porter, because he bet, obviously, on the NBA, but specifically on his own team to lose. And I've read a lot of think pieces. Read one recently on The Athletic about why gambling is so bad, and it just made me shake my head. And I kind of wanted to dive in to that situation because we've seen NFL guys get in trouble so far. So you guys know the drill. A lot of football coming up. But first, I want to tell you about my close personal friends. Gametime. Go to your smartphone. Go to wherever you download your apps and download the Gametime app, the official ticketing app of this podcast. You know what the summer is fun for? Doing things. Getting out and about. Having some fun. Going to something. A baseball game. Go enjoy the sun. Go enjoy a beer. Do it with your friends. Do it with your wife. Do it with your son. Concert, comedy shows. I got you covered. Just go to Gametime. Buy a pair of tickets wherever you live. Search venues. Search where you want to go. Maybe you're on a trip. Maybe you're on vacation somewhere and you're like, oh, so-and-so is coming to this town, to this area. I want to go see him. Your first pair of tickets, you get $20 off when you use the promo code JOHN. That's JOHN, JOHN, promo code JOHN. Save $20 on your first pair of tickets. Very, very easy to use. You can search by venue. You can search by artist. You can search by team. Gives you sight lines, price points. I cannot recommend it enough. Been using it for a long time. Download the Gametime app. Promo code JOHN. I just saw that the WNBA was up over 300%. Their draft, obviously, Caitlin Clark went number 1. It's like she's like Bitcoin, just keeps going up and up. Obviously, she is a very unique character. Nobody relative to what just witnessed the draft. Hell, I even watched the first couple picks. I never would watch the WNBA draft, and I'll probably never watch it again. But she got me there. She's an outlier. She's a Tiger Woods. She's a Michael Jordan. Now, I'm not saying she's going to be that as a pro, but the hype, what she has meant to her sport, very, very unique character. The NFL draft has always been a big deal. I've loved the NFL draft since I was a kid. I would imagine many people listening to this also loved it. I've never really related to, like, I'm not a college football guy. I'm only an NFL guy. Those days are kind of dying with the, I would say, explosion in popularity in college football. But I love college football. I love the NFL. It's an easy transition to watch the draft, watch the players that you have watched for years. And one thing college football has that now, for example, basketball doesn't have is consistency. Now, guys transfer, but players have to stay in college minimum 3 years. And the majority of guys that get drafted high are prominent programs that are prominent on television. So we have seen them play. Michigan, Ohio State, USC, Alabama, LSU, Georgia. You know all, Oregon, Washington, all the Texas, Oklahoma. the cast of characters. Like the top teams typically have the most guys in a given draft. That's why this year Michigan is going to have, potentially 17, 18 guys drafted. Washington could have 9, 10 guys drafted. That's 30 players from 2 teams that played in the national championship. 20 plus million people watch the national championship. But I read this, my guy Ethan Strauss, who covered the NBA for a long time and now is like this hybrid, writes about television ratings, social issues. It's just fascinating reads. He's a very, very smart guy, graduated from Cal. I've never read anyone like him. He's got a Substack. It's the only Substack I currently pay for, and it's just fantastic every time I read it. And he wrote recently about the kind of death of baseball. And I think you could put on a bigger level basketball in this, that if people stop watching your regular season, you can't just expect them to come when the postseason starts. And that's, kind of borne out these last several years, that the diminishing product of people not watching for 5-6 months in the regular season, they don't just show up in the playoffs. I love golf. Absolutely love it. I love it as much as football. The majors, I like every bit as much as playoff games. I've never been naive, would be the wrong way to put it, but I don't know, arrogant enough to act like it's any bigger than it is. So it's a niche sport, always has been. Tiger wasn't, but everyone else in my lifetime definitely has been. But I enjoy it. But the other day, it was, reported that the Masters were down 20%. Well, their regular tournaments have been down. So is it that shocking that if people aren't watching the regular events, the build up to the big events isn't as much? I'm sure many people saw across somewhere on social media that there was a report out there that Rory turned down $850 million. Now, who knows if that's true? My personal take is I think people are kind of exhausted with that conversation. Most people are not millionaires. Most people with inflation, are struggling to go to the grocery store and get 2 meals for their family under $100, right? So I just think people are tired of it. And it's come to fruition that less people watch the Masters. It's not an opinion, that's a fact. I'm not shocked by it at all. I watched basically every shot, but people didn't. And I understand why. What football has that these other sports don't is we love the regular season. Same thing college football, because it builds up to the playoffs. And obviously the regular season games have historic amounts of people watching. And then the playoffs double, triple that. Obviously the Super Bowl has always been a massive, massive event in this country. But if you think about it, like if you're watching a television show or watching a movie that you've never seen, you would never just skip to the end to see how the thing finishes. You want to watch it through the build up to the ending. Same thing with a book. You don't skip to the last 20 pages of a book you've never read or listened to for us audiobook guys. You listen to it throughout. So the buildup of the characters, the buildup of whatever you're listening to for the finale, however it's going to end. And that's what football has become. You have to watch the regular season, the ebbs and the flows, and people do for the finish, right? Which is the playoffs, which is awesome because of the one and done mentality. Listen, I'm not the biggest NBA guy anymore, but the play-in games were kind of captivating. The Laker game and the Warrior game. Like I was interested. Why? Because there were real stakes. But I think with the draft, what makes it fascinating is that when I was a kid, college basketball was really big. And superstar players, Shaq, Allen Iverson, you name it. The overwhelming majority of guys in my youth in the 90s didn't just play college basketball. They played it for several years. So you knew about the character. And most of them played in prominent programs. So you had a base when they were drafted. And if you think about this upcoming draft, think about like the top 10 players we're talking about. Think about it. Caleb Williams has played at USC in Oklahoma. J.J. McCarthy was the starting quarterback for Jim Harbaugh and the national champion Michigan Wolverines. Drake May, you say, was a little under the radar because he played at North Carolina, but because of the sport he plays in, we've been hearing about his name for a couple years. And Jaden Daniels won the Heisman Trophy at LSU, I would say a top 3 or 4 program in the country. I'm not saying on a given year. I'm just saying in the totality of college football, especially in my lifetime. 3 different coaches have won national championships there in the last 20 years. That's a remarkable accomplishment. Saban, Eddie O, and Les Miles. Like, that is a powerhouse program. And then you just factor in other players. Marvin Harrison Jr. He's fucking Marvin Harrison's kid and started Ohio State. Even Joe Alt, who we'll get into, was a star tackle at Notre Dame. So you have this buildup. You already know about the characters that get inserted into the television show, which is the NFL. So they're not just random. Now, obviously, random guys come. We see it every year in the draft. A random fifth rounder, an undrafted free agent, a seventh rounder that you didn't really watch in college that played at some random school at Kansas State or whatever. And if you're not a Big 12 fan, you've never really seen him play, and he becomes a really good player. But for a lot of the guys, we've seen them play in college several times. And I think that's something the NFL has that just these other leagues, and this is why the separation is only going to continue. So there's nothing like draft night because it is pretty pure. Guys, just your team gets to add players. It's one, I remember Howie used to say this all the time. We only have several times a year when we get to add players. When free agency starts, the draft, and during training camp when guys are cut, and obviously at the end of training camp when you trim down your roster. So it doesn't happen year round. Now, obviously, on the margins, you can claim a guy or make a trade. But for the most part, the big time to make talent acquisition are the three moments: free agency, the draft, and the major cutdown. So the difference here relative to the major cutdown, like a guy's getting cut. Here, when you draft a guy in the first or second round, there's not only hope, but it's like, damn, we just drafted Rome Odunze, the star wide receiver from Washington that I've watched play 5 times. Or damn, we just watched Brock Bowers, who I know a lot about. And you just can't fake that. Getting back to Caitlin Clark, one thing she has is we know a lot about her. We've been watching her play now for a couple years. She has a lot of built-in equity with us. Listen, Steph Curry and the Warriors dynasty probably ended last night. Now, you could argue it was already over, but Klay Thompson, I would say, is not going to be back on the Warriors. But one thing that Steph had that a lot of guys don't have anymore is when he got to the Warriors. Now, no one, even the Warriors, never thought that he would turn out to be, I don't know, a top 10 player of all time and one of the most transcendent, unique talents we've ever seen any sport. But we all knew a lot about him because of the NCAA tournament. We had followed his career. He was a built-in character. So there was momentum building as his career ascended. Going back to Michael Jordan, same thing. The dude hit the game-winning shot in the national championship when he was a freshman. Even Tiger Woods. You don't have to watch amateur golf to know. Everyone's saying this guy's a can't miss, going to be one of the all-time greats. He just won the U.S. Amateur 3 times. He had been on television shows since he was like 3 years old. People have been talking about him. Even if you can't stand golf. There wasn't a soul of age in the late to mid 90s that didn't know or heard of Tiger Woods. And that's what the NFL brings us next Thursday, is a bunch of guys we know a lot about going to a bunch of teams that we all watch 17 times a year. And I love this event. I can never get enough of it. And I just can't wait till Thursday. The 82 game preseason is in the books, and it's finally time for the real season. Don't miss out on any of the NBA playoff action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. From the play-in tournament through the finals, DraftKings Sportsbook has you covered with same-game parlays, live betting, odds boosts, and so much more. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code JOHN. New customers bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets instantly. That's code JOHN, John, only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Another reason I can't wait till Thursday is Belichick will be on with McAfee. And I said this when Belichick didn't get the Atlanta Falcons job, that I think Belichick, one, the perception of him, let's face it, being a dictator, tough to work with. And let's face it, I don't necessarily agree with this because I think we all can be this way. Asshole, miserable, curmudgeon. And listen, some of it's definitely probably true, but that he just sucks. And he's not a head coach in the NFL. Now, maybe it's that he's 73 years old. Maybe that he had to be the GM. I don't know. But it is nuts when you just look at the coaching picture that Bill Belichick isn't there. He's been in the league since 1975. Like, I'm sorry, he kind of knows what he's doing. It's why I'm shorting the Patriots. I think they are going to be a debacle the next couple years. Could be wrong, but if I had to place one strong bet, I feel the strongest on that. And I'd probably bet on Harbaugh and the Chargers being successful, right? Even everyone betting on the Bears, I wouldn't feel great about it. Their history would show it's still pretty risky. But I think you saw, if you go, and I would recommend this because the Belichick we got forever in the press conferences when he was wearing a hoodie, New England Patriot, or his classic like kind of blue button up, and he said nothing. And he was mostly pretty awful in those press conferences. Beside when he'd randomly get asked about a special team player, or he'd go on some long, diatribe about how the winless, whatever team he was playing in December actually has a lot of talent and everyone would make fun of him. He has a big personality. And I've been, know people that have not only worked there, that have played there. And they're like, the guy that you see off camera dealing with us is a lot different than the guy that you just see in the 15-minute snippets of the press conferences. It's why I was a big believer in the easiest way to change his perception. Now, maybe he's a lock to get a job next year. Maybe he's not. I mean, he just had his birthday. He's going to be 74 next year. I mean, I'm sorry. Even though coaches are definitely younger than the majority of like 74-year-olds, just because they spend most of their time around younger people, there's a vibe. Like Pete Carroll's the same age. They don't feel that old when you hear them talk. But I probably not a shoo-in is to find a way on the Amazon broadcast. He is too good to be on pregame shows. That's a waste. Reality is, I'm not watching that, and neither are most owners. Why? Their team is at a game. But there are two games that every owner watches. Every owner, beside the two playing in the game. That's Thursday night and Monday night. Even Sunday night, a lot of the league is traveling back and not able to watch the game. But every owner and every decision maker is at home on Thursday night and Monday night. Well, Monday night's set. They gave $150 million to Buck and Aikman. That was the right move. But Thursday night, let's face it, is not. I've said forever, Kirk Herbstreit's the stud. Love him on college football. I don't think he's that great. Him and Al don't have great chemistry. If I was Amazon, I would be all over Belichick and try to get him involved in that broadcast. And I also think Bill, like if you watch him on McAfee, like he's kind of a different guy. Now, I'm not saying he's Mr. Loosey-goosey. He's not Mr. Politician there, but he's very easy to watch. And his depth of knowledge is insane. Matt Rule, who, listen, we can say what we want about Matt Rule as the NFL coach. It was a debacle. He's a good college coach. I would imagine Nebraska in the next couple of years is going to be much more competitive. Are they ever going to be a playoff team? I don't know, but they are much more likely to win 8-9 games in the near future than they are to be some shit team in which they've been. Matt Rule said that he had Bill come to their operation and spend a day with the coaches. He said I don't know if he was in the front of the room, back of the room when he was talking. I don't know if he was talking to the entire group or just the defense. That Matt Rule said he was embarrassed. I was embarrassed that I'm a head coach and I don't know a tenth of what this guy is talking about. That's how crazy how much this guy knows. The only way for Bill to give that to the ownership is to put it on display. And I just hope it doesn't seem like it's going to happen, but I think that would have been the move. There was another story that came out today. I think there was a long, one of those classic Big J. Wickersham does a really good job, like the ESPN guys. Basically, one of the lines about Belichick and the hiring process and how he didn't get the Atlanta job and how it kind of ended in New England is that Bob and definitely Jonathan Kraft bad-mouthed him to Arthur Smith. Now, listen, anytime things end in football, in any business, with rich, big ego guys, it's going to be ugly. I've defended Bill. Like, I understand Robert Kraft. You can have any opinion you want. You figured out a way to start from nothing, make money, buy the team, and you hired Belichick. Jonathan Kraft inherited this entire life, which I'm not one of those people that like looks down on people just because they're born into a situation, right? I've known a lot of people born in situations that are very capable, right? I've known a lot of people not born into situations that aren't capable to fucking walk a dog across the street. So where you're born, like successful people can come from all walks of life. Peyton Manning was born rich. Steph Curry was born rich. Like, listen, there are going to be a lot of owners that, take over in the NFL that are impressive guys that their fathers made the money. And then there are going to be guys that are kind of clowns. I don't blame Belichick for not respecting that guy. I'm not a big Jonathan Kraft guy, just from reading things about him, watching the documentary, that felt, his dad's 80 plus years old. That it does feel a little bit like Jonathan Kraft has a vendetta against Belichick. And one of the things it said in there is he basically badmouthed Belichick to Arthur Smith to essentially not hire the guy. I would say this: the Patriot dynasty and their wealth, a large percentage of their name power has come from the success of the football team, which we know they had absolutely nothing to do with. They've even admitted, we never told Bill what to do. Even with Brady, the one time they kind of like, you got to trade Jimmy Garoppolo. But then they ended up a couple years later letting Brady walk anyway. They gave this guy carte blanche to be in full control. And he made that family name not only very famous, not only very successful, but an NFL champ with Tom over and over and over again. So if I'm Bill, and it's obviously just based on his coaching history, he can be very spiteful. He can be very petty. I would hate those guys, specifically the kid. I already didn't respect him. I would have a vendetta and a revenge of doing everything possible to get back in the league so I could play that guy again. Because the Patriots, I think the other day, tweeted out, "Happy birthday, Bill." It's like, guys, you guys are trying a little too hard. I wanted to dive in really quick that I'm not going to break down the offensive linemen, like the defensive linemen, the quarterbacks, and the wide receivers. But I do think Joe Alt is really interesting. Now, full disclosure, I don't love 6'8" and above tackles. That's a little tall for my taste. I like my tackle to be in the 6'5", 6'4.5", maybe 6'6". Like, that's kind of the prime range. The Trent Williams, the Lane Johnsons, Jason Peters, Tyron Smith. Like, I'm not looking for a power forward in the NBA here. And in 2024, that's really a center. But you know what I mean. And everyone widely kind of universally feels to consider, and I've even texted some buddies that have him as the number one tackle in the NFL or in the draft. And they think he's like borderline can't miss prospect. I don't know. I think you are at a huge advantage when you are 6'8" plus going up against these pass rushers, because all the edge guys all the good ones can bend, get low, and use leverage against tackles. So when you're 6'8", 6'9", the ability to bend down to their level is difficult. That extra couple inches is a disadvantage. And listen, I know this guy's a good athlete, but in 2018, there were two tackles drafted really high. The San Francisco 49ers took Mike McGlinchey, an All-American team captain from Notre Dame. And the Oakland Raiders, who wanted McGlinchey, remember, there was a coin flip at the combine between John Lynch and John Gruden. I attended that coin flip. The Niners won, and the Raiders were sitting there at 10, ultimately traded back with the Arizona Cardinals, and they ended up getting Josh Rosen, and they drafted Colton Miller at 15. It is inarguable that the Raiders got very lucky, and Colton Miller is a dramatically better player than McGlinchey. McGlinchey's a starter. Somehow he found a way to get Sean Payton to give him $80 million, which I thought was easily the worst free agent contract last season. But here's McGlinchey's problem. Not a great athlete, and like these other guys, really tall. So he really, really struggles in pass protection. Now, McGlinchey is a good run blocker, but I don't pay tackles to run block. I pay them to protect the most important asset in my building, the quarterback, in passing situations. And McGlinchey is a massive red flag in that situation. Colton Miller, who is a much better athlete, foot athlete, straight line speed athlete, movement-wise, has become, I don't want to say a high-end left tackle, but a very, very good starter. Someone who could be your starting left tackle for a decade plus, and he's scheduled to be that for the Raiders. And he's a way better athlete. Now, I texted a buddy who his team, some people think, is going to be very interested in Joe Alt. And he's like, we worked him out. And he's like, I hear what you're saying. I think his bend and movement ability is actually pretty good. I just think that you get McGlinchey. It's not the end of the world. You get a starter. I saw a scout told Zerline, my guy who's great at comps, comped him to McGlinchey. He's like, I don't like that comp as much. I like Eric Fisher, who was also tall, not quite 6'8", 6'7.5", and ended up playing for the Chiefs from 2013 to 2020. Had a long career in the NFL before his body gave out. But if you're taking Eric Fisher or McGlinchey in the top 10, I don't know if you love that. Now, best case scenario, you get Colton Miller, great. And you know where I stand. You swing for the fences, you hope for best case scenario. I just think that this guy has a lot of potential downside in a league that has never had the abundance of elite pass rushers. Most teams have multiple. Most teams have defensive tackles that are now 6'4", 6'5", that can rush the passer, that you can kick out to the edges, and you don't have a shot in hell. I remember the Rams against the Niners used to kick out sometimes Aaron Donald to end over McGlinchey. I was like, good luck. And he couldn't block him. Now, you could say Aaron Donald's one of the great pass rushers of all time. Fine. Think how many teams in the league have elite defensive tackles. Those smaller guys, you can't touch them. So I'm not saying this guy's going to be bad. I'm not saying this guy is not a good prospect. I'm just saying, for me, 6'8", 6'9" tackles are massive, massive buyer bewares. eBay Motors is here for the ride. You know, the first car I ever got, I was 16 years old, and my grandpa gave me a ride. And like any young lad who got a car that, let's face it, would not have been my first choice, I had to touch it up a little bit. And we tinted out the windows. We added a big subwoofer to the back, and you could hear me from miles away coming home. My parents sure loved me for that one. So did my neighbors. But I think the key to any young person getting a car is to personalize a little bit, because you're probably not going to get your dream car. And as you get older, you kind of become a car person, or you don't. But you definitely have preferences, right? Some of us like bigger cars. I know I do. I've only had big cars, SUVs. And there are certain non-negotiables. I like 3 rows of seats. Now, ideally, I don't have kids right now, so I take out that 3rd row seat, and I like a big, I like a lot of trunk room. Some people, don't like SUVs, like smaller cars. I've never been that big since my high school car of tinting the windows. I don't care if you see me or not, but I know some people, like, the first thing they do is tint the windows. It's crazy. The older you get, I had to have the subwoofers. The subwoofer, I couldn't listen to music for 5 minutes with the subwoofer like I did when I was younger. But there is something very, very special about that first car. I don't care how many cars you get since, how much money you make to get sweeter cars. You never quite forget that first ride and some of the memorable moments that you had in it in your high school years. So with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Brake kits, LED headlights, roof rack bumpers, whatever your baby needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Let's end on this. The NBA banned this dude for life for gambling. Michael Porter's brother, who's a nobody, 2-way contract, irrelevant player. But I have read more articles. Every time I see a Big J writing about gambling, I just read it. I kind of hate read it. It's kind of sick. Probably shouldn't do it. But my overall take is, when media people talk about gambling, I would imagine 95% of media people not only have never made a bet, would never make a bet, no matter how much money they made. It's not really the way they're wired. Most of those guys, let's face it, I saw a lot of their tweets over the last, especially when COVID happened, their level of risk is much smaller than every human I've ever met. Like, it's really, really low. So, and I've always thought this about media people who can be very anti-business. And a lot of them, again, because of Twitter, you can just see their beliefs, don't really understand it. When you cover billion-dollar industries, it's almost like, shouldn't you guys take some like business courses or be forced to like listen to podcasts to kind of understand the way money works? But that's a whole separate conversation. My point is with gambling, this one isn't that complicated. The guy bet on his own team to lose. There are some things that I understand, like an NFL team, an NBA team, a Major League Baseball team, like, hey, listen, guys, we're all in business with gambling. We're all profiting from this, but there are some rules, a little convoluted, but you're just not allowed to bet from the facility. Obviously, you can't bet on this sport or college sports. You can bet on the other leagues. You just can't bet from the confines. Like you'd have to hammer those homes. You would have to make sure you consistently win over those. But I think gambling on your own team to lose, I don't think anyone would ever have to say that out loud. Like drugs are legal in California. Crack is basically legal. We all know don't do crack. I don't need to tell my team, hey, can't bet on us to lose. Like, no shit. This guy is a fucking moron. And also, like, this guy, you could argue, is just a bad guy. And you could say, well, playing for the Raptors, they lose a lot. Of course. Like, it's actually probably not a bad bet. But betting on your team to lose, there's nothing worse. And I have been lucky enough to be around a lot of athletes, definitely in these situations from a team. I don't think anyone thinks like that. I don't think, I think such an outlier of someone willing to do that. You know, back the famous story of the Black Sox when they threw the World Series, those guys didn't have any money. I mean, the average player in the NFL now makes millions of dollars. That's why that Shaq said on his podcast the other day, like the bookie, one of the major gamblers in America, like 20 years ago, told me, yeah, I can't afford to buy players. You guys all make too much cash, but I can buy the referees. You can't buy someone. I also think it's just common sense. Like, don't do crack. Don't bet against your own team. Like, no shit. If I have to tell you that, you should not be on my team. You're a complete moron and you will lose me games. Obviously, you might be trying because you're throwing the game. But maybe I'm naive. I truly don't believe there is anyone in the NFL who wouldn't say, like, yeah, that's wrong. Even if that guy knows, like, hey, we're the worst team in the league and we're playing the best team in the league, we're probably going to lose. They would not bet on their own team to lose. I feel very confident about that.